All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. Airstrike plans on a freely available messaging app. That's what the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic found out when he was accidentally added to a chat about planned airstrikes in Yemen. These are images from the actual chat, first obtained by the magazine. You can clearly see Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth lay out an exact timeline for when the strikes would take place. This was on the app Signal. It's an end-to-end encrypted app anyone can download for free. The Department of Defense warned on March 14th Russian hackers are trying to exploit several known vulnerabilities in the program. Two members of Indiana's congressional delegation have received classified briefings on the subject. Senator Todd Young serves on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I talked to him shortly after he was briefed. We also discussed his call for a national economic security strategy. Let's bring in Senator Todd Young. Senator, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you, Garrett.
So I want to begin with the incident in which Trump administration officials discussed the planned airstrikes in Yemen over Signal and apparently accidentally included the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic in the chat. You were in some of the hearings on this. Was this a security breach? Was classified information about the attacks leaked?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to ask about this in an open hearing, also a closed hearing of the Intel Committee. Clearly, I mean, common sense dictates this was not something that we should encourage. This is not something that should be done again. And we need to ensure that we have parameters in place to prevent it from happening in future cases. So that's my focus right now. I'm glad President Trump has emphasized the importance of this and that we won't be having this happen again. I do trust his national security team, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz in particular. He offers strong counsel to the president, and I think he's well served by his counsel to focus on terrorists, to make sure that terrorists know they can't lay in wait for American shipping, which we depend on to sustain our way of life. This is a marked change from the previous administration, frankly, where we allowed many of these terrorists to plan attacks and to conduct attacks against U.S. interests and those of our allies.
Still, this chat included some pretty specific information about the timing of the airstrikes. Should Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth or National Security Advisor Mike Waltz resign?
You know, that in the end is why the president was elected. He's going to make these decisions, and I support that sort of delegation of labor here. I do think that the National Security Advisor in particular, someone with whom I've served for a fairly long period, is well versed in these issues, and his counsel to the president to finally fight back to restore deterrence in the Middle East and beyond is very much appreciated, especially coming off the Biden administration where they did not take this sort of kinetic action when necessary.
Does this suggest a deeper problem with operational security, though, among the Trump administration's security team?
Well, it suggests that all of us in this age of cell phones and social media should be very careful. Should be very careful when we're not on secure lines, that is government lines and in secure facilities, ideally. And we should also only be communicating with people on a need-to-know basis. So we're going to learn from this example. I know the administration is, and there's still some unanswered questions, I do have to say, Garrett, and I was able to dive into much of that during the closed session, a couple of days ago.
You recently wrote an op-ed alongside former Marine Corps Commandant General David Berger, and you called for a national economic security strategy, and you followed that up with a similar op-ed this week. What prompted you to write them?
Well, I mean, China, for really some period of time, has been conducting economic warfare against the American people. They have been disrupting or threatening to disrupt our supply chains. It's a form of economic coercion. They've been dumping their commodities at below market, below production prices into the United States. They have been engaging in other forms of economic warfare. Intellectual property theft is a longstanding issue and needs to be addressed. And our playbook has been, over the years, incoherent. It's been a mix of sanctions policy and trade policy and working through the private sector and public sector on sort of a one-off basis. There are lessons to be learned from each of our different employments of economic tools, of statecraft, and the interplay between different economic tools. And we need to start formalizing those lessons learned in a broader strategy and figure out in different contexts how we can affect changes in behavior from our adversaries, China in particular.
In that speech to Congress, though, the president called for repealing the CHIPS and Science Act, which you worked very hard on. Have you had a chance to talk to him about his concerns?
I have. Yeah, I've spoken to the president. I've spoken to those around him. The president's made no bones about the fact that certain aspects of implementation of the CHIPS Act he didn't like. Heck, I had to work with the Biden administration on this implementation. So you can imagine there were certain things I wasn't happy with as well. A child care mandate made no sense in a tight labor market. These fabs where people are employed to make semiconductors are probably going to be offered high quality child care anyway to work there. Union labor to build these fabs. That was a principled compromise I made with the other co-sponsors of this legislation. It may cost a bit more, but it is of high quality. And I know the Trump administration has prided itself on its engagement of labor. So, I'll work with the president to make tweaks to this legislation. But I have to say, if you have received a private sector foreign direct investment commitment of roughly $500 billion and counting, for an investment of $30 billion, that's an amazing return on taxpayer investment. More importantly, we're going to be a lot more prepared for a doomsday scenario in which the very computer chips that go into our ballistic missiles and our warfighters' equipment we're more independent of other countries in sourcing those semiconductors. So great piece of legislation, and we'll work with President Trump to improve it.
Speaking of defense manufacturing, President Trump announced that Boeing will build the F-47 fighter. Was that a wise choice given some of the recent struggles Boeing has had?
Reputationally, there's no question Boeing has taken a big hit. I've asked some probing questions in recent years of their leadership. I was just on the phone this week with their CEO, sort of peppering him with questions about internal improvements. The Armed Services Committee here in the U.S. Senate and DOD is really going to have to continue to kick the tires and make sure that Boeing is up to the task with respect to this. I'll certainly do my part as well.
How do we ensure this doesn't turn into a repeat of the F-35? That was billed as a cost-saving program, and it turned into the most expensive weapons program in U.S. history.
That's why we have an independent branch of government, as frustrating as it might be to some folks sometimes. And we have an independent voice, and we need to provide rigor and scrutiny to their production process. We need to ask hard questions, and it's incumbent upon the DOD to do this as well. And so I'll probably have more to say about this contract and this relationship on a going forward basis.
Meanwhile, Congressman Andre Carson calls the issue a serious security breach. He serves on the House Intelligence Committee. I talked to him after he got out of a hearing on the Signal chat on Wednesday.
The American people are being gaslit by the president and other officials If classified materials are communicated on an unclassified platform, that's a security breach by any other standard. Last week, an email went out across the Pentagon that warned about the vulnerabilities of using Signal from a national and global security standpoint. Well, I think going forward, I think we have to get very serious about ways in which we communicate. There are numerous platforms under the JWICS format that allow for secret communication. We did it when I worked for the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. We do it now on the Intelligence Committee. Members of the intelligence community communicate through different platforms, CIPRANet and others. And so my focus is to make sure that these folks are given the proper oversight to ensure this doesn't happen again. One thing, something has to happen as it relates to Secretary Hogsett's leadership and his leadership team. The intranet system, as I mentioned before, is a system that houses top secret and sensitive compartmented information. JWICS is a critical part of that apparatus. And so folks who have been given top secret and CSI levels of security have to be responsible.
Coming up, state lawmakers want county jails to join President Trump's immigration enforcement push. We'll explain how. Welcome back. Sheriffs would have to notify ICE if they suspect someone is in their jail in their jail is in the country illegally. That's under a bill approved by the state Senate. It's a narrower bill than what the House originally approved, but its critics argue it still would undermine rather than help public safety. The latest version of the bill requires jail personnel to notify the sheriff if they suspect someone arrested on felony or misdemeanor charges is in the country illegally. The sheriff would then have to notify ICE. Earlier versions asked the arresting officer to alert the sheriff.
I mean, IMPD doesn't have that time, and IMPD doesn't have those resources. I mean, they're arresting somebody. I want IMPD back out on the street, patrolling and keeping our community safe. I don't need them taking time alerting ICE or alerting anybody else for that matter.
Freeman says the change keeps the bill's overall goal while addressing trust concerns. He says a simple traffic stop is not enough to lead to an immigration check.
The only time this bill applies is when somebody has been arrested for a misdemeanor or felony. Then and only then can the local sheriff then do their work to determine who this person is and are they here legally. That's the only time this bill applies.
But immigration rights advocates say it could still ensnare the wrong people. They point to testimony by the bill's original House author.
In being questioned about what probable cause would look like, one of the questions that he stated was asking himself whether or not this person was born in the country. So again, we're not talking about that. That's not getting at the root cause of undocumented immigration. That applies to anybody who could potentially be here legally as well.
Senate Democrats point out police already often check with ICE if they're unsure of an arrestee's immigration status. And Castoreno says the bill will only lead to racial profiling and lawsuits.
This is under the guise of public safety, but there are so many other measures that we could be taking in this state to actually address public safety concerns. And this does nothing but exacerbate the problem because it erodes trust between the immigrant community and our law enforcement.
The bill already passed the House, but it has to return to that chamber because of changes the Senate made. Coming up, Indiana's best political team takes on the Signal War Plan leak and rumors about Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett's 2027 plans. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Republican Whitley Yates and Democrat Arielle Brandy. Let's begin with the uproar over President Trump's national security team using the Signal app to discuss the timing of airstrikes in Yemen. Whitley, we'll begin with you. The people who are on that chat are no strangers to sensitive information. Should someone resign over this?
I'm not necessarily sure if someone should resign, but what I will say is this definitely needs to be investigated. If this were on the other side of the aisle and this were the Biden administration, down hard. And you cannot have an administration that consistently says that the media is fake news and can't be trusted, and then having the media looped in on national security issues does not make any sense. So there needs to be some accountability and investigation, and then we got to make sure that this never happens again.
Arielle, does it matter that no targeting information was shared in this chat, at least as far as we know?
No, I think it's just the principle of the matter. I agree with Whitley 100% on this. I don't know if we should be calling for resignations, but I do think that it is worth an investigation happening and not having the president discredit the judge that's going to be looking at this. I mean, this is definitely a threat to us. And I do think that it's important that if we're going to try to put trust in the Trump administration and believe that they can lead us as government officials, then we have to be able to trust that these types of secure conversations are not happening in a signal chat, something that I personally could use at any moment to be able to share information. I wouldn't want someone who's leading this country and sharing that type of information out to just do that and then also include the media in the process and then discredit that too.
Let's turn from global politics to local. Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett this week hosted a fundraiser which his critics suggests he might run for a fourth term. Arielle, might there be something here?
I mean, if there is, I'm sorry, but Mayor Joe, it's probably time to pass the torch. It's time to hang it up. I mean, there has been a lot going on within this last year and him coming into this third term. I don't think that it would be wise to be able to run for a fourth term, especially with what's going on with the council. And also, too, we won't even get into the sexual abuse allegations that have been coming out of this admin. I don't think that there's a good path forward. So a fourth term, for me personally, as a Democrat, I don't think that it's the best thing for Mayor Joe.
Whitley, how do you read this? And right now, do Indianapolis Republicans have anyone who might be a viable candidate in 2027?
I think anybody would be better than Mayor Joe Hogsett. I haven't seen him, haven't heard from him. Only thing I've heard are about the terrible things that have happened with the sexual assault allegations within his administration. And I've seen the potholes on the streets that haven't been filled yet. So the fact that the only people have seen him that are at a fundraiser just lets you know where his mind is. And it's definitely on the money. When it comes to a fourth term, Indianapolis couldn't survive a fourth term of Joe Hogsett leading it at all. Like, we just couldn't survive it. He's not the type of leader that is very present in the city. And we as Indianapolis Hoosiers deserve better leadership than that. As far as Republicans, we have a bench of talent. Does anybody want to take this on? I'm not sure, but I definitely think that there's a bench of talent that would be able to run this city far better than how he's been running it.
Let's take a step back for a moment. How widespread, how common is it for someone who is already planning on leaving office at the end of their term to continue holding fundraisers like this?
I mean, I'm going to be honest. A lot of people will consistently get the money because they can utilize this money in different ways, whether it's for another state race or something along those lines. So it is very common for people to continue to fundraise, knowing that they are either going to run for something else or utilize that piggy bank to kind of co-opt candidates to do what they want them to do by being able to stuff their coffers.
The state Senate signed off on a bill to require sheriffs to notify ICE if they suspect someone in their jails in the country unlawfully. Whitley, I've got about a minute 30 left. A lot of jails already do this. Is this bill really necessary?
Absolutely. I think it is, specifically in the time that we're in. And this is not if they're just walking into the Fashion Mall or Castleton. This is when they're engaging with the police under the assumption that they have broken or violated a law. So I do think sharing information between different law enforcement agencies is something that the agencies have been doing, but mandating it and getting some code on the books does not hurt Indiana. It helps.
Arielle, the bill has been changed, so jail personnel are the ones who have to look into the matter, not the original arresting patrol officers. And it's limited to situations where someone is already suspected of other criminal charges. This doesn't involve infractions. Does that strike the right balance between public safety and civil rights?
I think we've been able to hear from various sheriffs and also chiefs say that, some of their law enforcement officers just don't have the capacity to do that. They already have protocols in place and they're already following it, and they're already in communication and ICE when it has to happen. I think right now what we're doing is we're embedding even more distrust between the community, especially our immigrant community, and how they feel towards law enforcement. So if we're already doing this work, mandating it, I don't think that will make it any better for our communities, or will it continue to kind of take away that harm that folks feel when it comes to the immigrant community? I'm really torn about this one because I understand I understand the angle of what they're trying to do, but I think that it causes more harm than it does good.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both. We will be right back. And thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Among other things, you'll be able to find my full interview with Senator Todd Young you just saw. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.